Tom Tugendhat, thanks very much for joining us this morning on TNG.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Tom. Slightly odd circumstance, but good to be with you.
Well, Sarajevo or London, it's always good to talk to you. Now, let's talk about Ukraine first off. You've studied Vladimir Putin and his administration very closely for years in the army, then, of course, in Parliament, now as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. What do you think his real objective is here over creating this crisis about Ukraine? What does he actually want from it all?
Well, I think he's trying to do a few things. The first is he's trying to test us. He wants to see whether or not the West, as he would put it, NATO, is united. He wants to see whether the United States is still serious. He wants to see whether or not we, the Germans, the French, others, will hang together at a moment when we're put under pressure. And he's just trying to feel us out. The second thing he's trying to do, of course, is he's trying to push democracy or freedom, or however you wish to put it, away from his borders. He's trying to make it clear that he's the only game in town and that those people who talk about political reform in Moscow haven't got a hope. And so the combination of those two means that what he's actually just trying to do is to destabilize, to put us on our back foot, and to make sure that the Ukrainians don't demonstrate a form of success that Russians could copy.
So it is possible he doesn't actually want war, to put it crudely, or a military incursion over that Ukrainian border again at all?
Well, it's absolutely possible, but the only person who knows it is Putin. Because in order to threaten, he's got to do all the preparations that he would have to do in order to invade. And so until he decides which option it is that he wants to go with, nobody except him really knows. My own suspicion is he's not warming up the Russian population to a war in Ukraine. I think he's aware very clearly, having remembered the last time he did this in 2014, that protests of the mothers of dead soldiers can be pretty undermining at home. So I suspect he doesn't want to. I suspect what he wants to do is to threaten in such a way that he gets what he wants without fighting. Whether he's prepared to actually fight, well, I'm afraid only he knows that.
The rest of the world has to be slightly prepared in case he is prepared to fight and prepared to try and stop him, obviously. And from that perspective, Europe and NATO's response has been far from ideal. I think everybody recognises that. There's no unified position at all on whether to arm Ukraine or what to do about it if Russia does invade. How has that disunity across Europe and NATO really been disastrous, I suppose, in the effort to try and dissuade Putin?
Well, it's been pretty bad in NATO, that's true, but the real problem has been with the European Union. Look, the European Union has set up a structure where it's effectively told member states that they've got to guard their borders against things like trade and migration and things like that, and by setting up Frontex and other organizations. But at the same time, countries like Germany are behaving very differently to countries like Lithuania, and that really is deeply problematic for somebody like Ursula von der Leyen, who's trying to, or claims she's trying to organise a unitary response on things like this. So, it is a genuine problem for the European Union, and is a demonstration that the European Union is not a strategic power. It may be a trade bloc, but it's if it's trying to be more than that, it's got a hell of a long way to go, and some of its major member states, Berlin in particular, are really not helping.
Well, you mentioned Berlin, and Germany is obviously the biggest dove in all this. I think for historical reasons that we all can understand, as well as economic ones, because they're obviously the most reliant in Europe on Russian gas after shutting down their nuclear power stations. Can you understand it from the Germans' perspective? It's simply too much to risk here by saber-rattling and threatening Russia.
Oh, of course I can understand it from the Germans' perspective, but the Germans, I'm afraid, are making a mistake that was started a number of years ago when you rightly say, after the Fukushima disaster in Japan, they shut down their nuclear power, and they made themselves much more reliant on Russian gas. And when they did that, they effectively handed over a lot more control over to people like Vladimir Putin. And, we also know, sadly, that if you've heard me talking about elite capture in London, where Russian money has bought far too much influence. Look at it in Germany. Former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder is on the board of various companies and is a very close friend of Vladimir Putin. This is, it's a whole different game in Berlin.
Looking forward, then, how important is it now to keep that threat of cutting Russia out of the SWIFT banking system or closing down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, for example, on the table as sanctions, as a hope of a deterrent? So, because both of those have been argued over, neither are on the table for, again, the simple reason the West cannot agree.
Well, I think the the really important thing is to keep Vladimir Putin guessing, because what he's looking for is he's looking for certainty. So if he knows if he does one thing, then he knows what the reaction is. If he knows if he does something else, then he'll know what the other reaction is. And the important thing to make sure that we are able to defend ourselves, to make sure that he's on the back foot, not us, is to keep him guessing. And that means we need to keep our range of options open, which is why things like President Biden's decision to rule out any form of troops or to say that a minor incursion might not draw a reaction are so deeply unhelpful, because they give certainty to somebody who is looking for it and remove certainty from the Ukrainians and from indeed our NATO partners in the East. And that's not great for the alliance, and it's not great for Ukraine.
Some have said that Europe, the EU, maybe even America might have responded differently if you had the UK's leadership inside Europe, still in the EU, might be able to influence what has been a fairly shambolic response from the European Union. Are you one of those? Do you agree with that?
Well, it's possible, but we'll never know. And the reality is we've been front and centre of this. I mean, it's absolutely true that Ben Wallace has been absolutely clear right from the beginning. And indeed, we've had Liz Truss making very clear statements on this as well. So, it's not true to say that Britain has been absent. Britain has been absolutely full-throated in its condemnation and absolutely front and centre of the support for the Ukrainian people as well, with our deployment of anti-tank weapons and things like that.
Well, looking at the UK's response, so yes, we're flying huge amounts of anti-tank missiles out to Ukraine as fast as the RAF can carry them. But that's only been going on for a week or so. Some have said that the UK itself has been fairly slow off the mark on this as well.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I'd buy that, actually. I mean, Op Orbital, as it's called, which is the military operation in Ukraine, has been really important in helping the Ukrainian people. When I was there last week, I was talking to various of the leading defence officials and ministers about who was helping, who wasn't. And one of them said our number one ally is the UK, number two is the UK, number three is the UK. And what he meant by that is that actually British personnel have been training Ukrainian forces for the best part of 7 years, I think it is now, and it's been a very important contribution to Ukraine's reform and preparation for further Russian saber rattling. So I think the UK has actually been there throughout.
It's hard to think, isn't it, how previous international leaders, you think Reagan, Thatcher, even Merkel, would have reacted in the same ways as to the current crop across the board. You mentioned disappointment in Biden, disappointment in Olaf Scholz in Germany. Do you think this Ukraine crisis has exposed, if you like, a crisis of confidence across the West?
Well, I certainly think that there has been an unravelling over recent years, and this is an unravelling that sadly is costing the British people and it's costing everybody else, which is that the pressures of countries like China and Russia, who are trying to change the way in which we have been able to trade and travel over the last, 70, 80 years, really. Well, I suppose really for the last 30 years, but it started 70, 80 years ago, is something that is concerning. And it's one of the reasons why I'm such a strong advocate of investing in our foreign policy. It's not, foreign policy isn't about foreigners, it's about us. It's about how do we make sure that British people can prosper? How do we make sure that, our kids can go and study abroad? How do we make sure we can take holidays? How do we make sure that we can sell goods around the world? And that requires a stable environment. It requires us to have partners and allies. Otherwise, we'll find life a lot more difficult.
What do you mean by an unravelling? An unravelling of what and by whom?
Well, if you look at organisations like the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization, they're being put under very severe pressure by countries that are breaking the established rules, as it were. And countries like, in obvious cases here, China in both those cases. If you look at the way that Russia is trying to undo the peaceful cooperation of nations in various other parts of the world, particularly in Eastern Europe, by its seeking to undermine governments. attempted assassinations in places like Montenegro, or indeed using people as a weapon as it traffics migrants over the borders from Belarus into places like Poland and Lithuania, you can see that what they're trying to do is they're trying to break apart these alliances, break apart these partnerships that have enabled us to prosper in peace and cooperation for the last, well, in different places for 30 or 40 years, in other places a bit longer. Well, they're succeeding a bit, but this is why I think we need to wake up and get real. And this is why I'm critical of the new leadership in Germany, but it's also why I'm critical of anyone else who is getting into silly fights with partners and allies, when what we really need to do is to build up alliance. This is a fundamental question about freedom. This is a fundamental question about the ability of the British people to prosper. I say again, British foreign policy isn't about foreigners. It's not about keeping others happy. It's about making sure we defend the interests of the British people. I'm absolutely unashamed when I say, the policies of the United Kingdom must be about putting the British people first. And what that means is building up the kind of alliances, the kind of partnerships that defend our interests, that allow us to trade and travel and keep us happy.
Give me an example of getting into a silly fight that we don't need to be in. I think you're referring to Britain here.
Well, I'm referring to some of the fights that we're picking at the moment in different areas. We really do need to make sure that we resolve the disputes at the moment that we have at the moment with some of our European partners. We need to get over the arguments that we're having on on some of our border issues, and make sure that we close them down, we move on, and we establish good grace and goodwill, the fact that the United Kingdom is whole and integral, and that we are looking for a good relationship with our partners, and we're not looking to pick little arguments. What we're actually trying to do is to move on and build a new relationship with our European partners that supports us all. And I think we can do that, but we do need to move on.
Let's touch upon a couple of other areas of the world that you've had some dealings with. The Chinese. Now, that is another major international country you've quite spectacularally fallen out with as an individual in the past. You've believed...
It's not quite fair. I haven't fallen out with the Chinese leadership. Chinese people. I've fallen out with the Chinese Communist Party. That's true, okay. But that's a small group within a very, very large country.
Let me redefine that. You've fallen out with the Chinese Communist Party leadership. In fact, you've accused them in the past of disrupting, harassing you with various sort of actions, or certainly some Chinese entities doing that. Is that sort of harassment, that low-level harassment, still going on?
In a very minor way. Every now and again, somebody... in Beijing or Shanghai will create an email address that looks pretty similar to mine and send out various silly emails claiming I've resigned from this or I've admitted to that. I mean, it's very sort of strange, irritable behaviour. And when I asked friends in the US tech industry what's going on, it's perfectly clear. Well, they know because it's you can see where the email addresses are registered, and they're registered in the same sort of places where bulk email addresses are registered on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. No. Oh, the Foreign Affairs Committee or Parliament or that sort of thing.
Right, you're obviously living with it then. Let me put another issue to you, which has caused some controversy in the UK over the last sort of few days. This business about this Nowzad animal sanctuary evacuation flight from Kabul, rather controversially. Now, in emails handed to you, to the Foreign Affairs Committee, of course, that you chair, it was claimed that the Prime Minister signed this all off. Prime Minister calls that rhubarb. And I think you've said you believe Ben Wallace, who also says it wasn't true that he or the Prime Minister agreed these flights. But the emails are there. Someone has clearly believed the Prime Minister did sign it off. So, I mean, what happened? Was it Lord Goldsmith, his office, making it up? Was it the hand of Mrs. Johnson, Carrie Johnson, who has been linked to all this as well?
Well, you're asking me questions I just can't answer there, Tom, because as you know, all I can do is I can share the evidence that is presented to the Foreign Affairs Committee. In this case, it's those emails, and I can listen to the evidence that's given. And, Ben Wallace was before the committee on Tuesday, and I have to say, he was extraordinarily, active at the time of the August evacuation. He was extremely good at making sure that the MOD was, responded extremely quickly, that the Chief of Joint Operations, Admiral Key, was all over it. It was a very impressive MOD response, and he has answered all of our questions extremely openly, extremely clearly. And I have to say, I believe Ben. I have absolutely no reason to think that he's saying anything other than the truth. So I'm afraid I can't marry the two together. What on earth
is therefore going on?
Well, it's extremely difficult to know, and this is a real question, because the British people need clarity in leadership. Leadership demands integrity. As you know, the army is extremely clear on that, and it's very difficult to know exactly what's happened here. So, I hope very much we'll have an answer. I don't have one. I can't explain it, and so we'll be putting it again to the Foreign Office to ask, and I hope very much that they'll be able to tell us what happened.
That means calling various people. Would you call Lord Goldsmith in front of you?
Well, we'll be inviting the Foreign Office to comment, actually. What we do is we invite, and the way it works is we invite ministers to appear one by one, and the next person who's coming before us is the Foreign Secretary, who's coming, I think it's next week or the week after.
Well, that'd be quite an interesting session, I'd imagine. Let's move on to domestic matters, finally. Now, as we speak, the Sue Gray report is still awaited, and the wait goes on. A lot of your colleagues, however, already think they know enough for the Prime Minister to either stay on or leave, and they've made their various positions publicly very clear on both of those, depending who they are. Are you one of them? Have you come to a decision yet on whether he should continue in office?
Tom, look, I've always believed that fairness matters in public life. It matters in private life as well, actually. But fairness matters, and I haven't heard the list of charges or the absence of charges that Sue Gray is going to present. I haven't seen them. And until I have, I think the fair thing to do is to listen. There's plenty of people who've expressed their views. They're very welcome to do so in whichever side they're going. But I think the fair thing to do is to wait and listen.
Okay. You will, however, have in your mind, I'm sure, what the bar that might be that Sue Gray may or may not reach for you in her report on whether the Prime Minister should resign. What if she has found him capable, guilty of something, culpable, should he have to go for? Criminality? Would that be resigning offence? Dishonesty? Is that enough for him to go?
It's very difficult to answer a hypothetical, because I don't know if you've met Sue Gray. She's one of the most extraordinary individuals. As you may know, she ran a pub in Newry in the 80s, at a time when most English people would have been nowhere near Northern Ireland, and certainly nowhere near South Armagh. She's an extraordinarily impressive and formidable individual, and I have no idea what she's going to uncover and what she's going to write. So I'm not going to try and guess or predict the output of somebody quite as unique as she is.
Okay, well, the one thing you could have done, which some of your colleagues have done, is write a letter to Graham Brady calling for a vote of no confidence. Have you written one of those letters?
Well, I have to say, some people have decided to do that. But as I say, I think the fair thing to do is to listen before you make a decision. Well, I'm saying that the fair thing to do is to listen before you make a decision. We'll see what comes out, Tom.
Okay, that's an interesting response. Now, look, a lot of your colleagues are a bit worried about the local elections coming up in May. I think there are seats up for grabs in your area, in Kent and Tonbridge. How concerned are you about what the slump in the polls that the party's going through now, what effect could that have in May on all your local councillors?
Look, let me be quite clear. We have some of the best and most hardworking people in our community working in local councils in the UK. It is quite extraordinary how much work many local councillors put in, who really go above and beyond what could really be expected of them. And they run some of the most essential services. At the borough level in my patch, they run waste services, which is, as you can imagine, is enormously important, and a lot of people care very deeply about, including me, about things like recycling. And at the county level in my patch, adult social care and education are so important. And those elements, how they deliver them, where they put the effort in, and where they put the resources, are absolutely fundamental to how our community works. And so when I hear talk about how these elections are going to go, and I hear it sort of linked to the Sue Gray report or to what's going on in Westminster, it always leaves me a little concerned, because we need to focus in a democracy on who you've hired to do what and what they can actually deliver. And judging local councils by what happens in Number 10 is simply, it's not only not fair, but it may get you not the result that you want, because actually what you want locally is you want a well-run council that's able to deliver for the community. They have no influence over Westminster. They have no say over, what does or doesn't happen in Number 10. And so giving local councillors a kicking for decisions that MPs or ministers take, I think is often not quite fair. So I hope
that
very
might
much
well be true, but it could also still happen.
Oh, of course it could happen. Of course it could happen, which is why, I very much hope that all this is resolved well before the elections in May, and councillors across the country are judged on their merit, and Conservative ones are seen for what they are, which is, hard-working local champions who deliver great services for the lowest possible price.
Let me ask you about something the Prime Minister said specifically this week in PMQs. He turned to Keir Starmer and he said, "You're a lawyer, I'm a leader." He really doesn't have very much good to say about lawyers at all, does he? Now, look, your father was a lawyer. He was a judge. I believe your wife is even a lawyer. Do you share the same antipathy towards lawyers as the Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister and I have both lived with lawyers. I mean, his former wife was a lawyer, as you know, as well. And so living under the rule of law at home is something I think we're both used to. And I'm not quite sure I'd have made the same dig about lawyers or leaders. I think you can be both, and there are certainly some who've really transformed national life as both lawyers and leaders. So I'm not quite sure I'd be quite so divisive. Although some of the best leaders I've served under are not lawyers, and I'm thinking here particularly of people like General Richards, who, as you know, is one of the most extraordinary leaders. Not much of a legal mind.
But is it clever to, if you're the Prime Minister, leader of your party, to slag off an entire profession, the profession of the law?
Well, I think he's having a go at Keir Starmer. I don't think he's really slagging off an entire profession. I think it's a rhetorical. He's using alliteration as a way of making effect. But he has a certain rhetorical style.
Mr Tugendhat, it is no secret that you had some fairly substantial ding-dongs with the Prime Minister in the past, chairing your committees. You do, both when he was Foreign Secretary in front of you. You had some tremendous goes at him also as Prime Minister and the Liaison Committee. You two have clashed quite spectacularly. He's made a load of other 2015 intake MPs, in your intake ministers. He hasn't offered you a position in the government ever at all. Does that bother you?
No, I've got a fantastic job. Look, I'm speaking to you here from Sarajevo, where I have been meeting various ministers and military officers and people who can actually change the way that one of the countries that could easily become a problem for us will operate. This is part of what I think is protecting the British people, assisting in shaping the foreign policy of the United Kingdom to make sure that our people are able to prosper in peace and happiness. So I think I've got one of the best jobs in politics, and I've also got the great freedom of not being bound by collective responsibility and therefore being able to say what I think. And I think that's a great luxury. So, no, it doesn't bother me. And, my job as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and my job on the Liaison Committee is to hold to account whoever is the Foreign Secretary and whoever is the Prime Minister. And, you say I've had ding-dongs with Boris Johnson. Yeah, that's true. I also have with Dominic Raab and with Jeremy Hunt. We had some pretty tough conversations. Let's see what it's like with Liz Truss. Her first session is next week. And when Theresa May was Prime Minister, I don't think she got a free ride in the Liaison Committee either. The point about Parliament is we're here to challenge, and I challenge from a Conservative perspective, other people challenge from a Labour perspective, but I challenge, I think, fundamentally in the interests of the British people, because, we need a health service that delivers for us. We need an education service that is resourced, that has kids going to school, not stuck at home. We need to make sure that we have an economy that actually delivers for Britain by, lowering taxes and encouraging employment, encouraging opportunity, encouraging startups and innovation. And we don't get that if we allow ourselves to be run in a way that is entirely consensual and doesn't have any challenge. We need to challenge. It's essential to a good government.
Now, look, there's no vacancy for the party leadership at the moment. Boris Johnson is your leader. You have, however, said in the past, though, would it be great to be Prime Minister? Yes, it would be. I'll serve at whatever level I'm asked to. Would you still like to serve at that highest level? Would you still like to be Prime Minister?
course, it'd be a huge privilege. I mean, it's one of those questions that I know many people ask, and some of my colleagues are coy about, and I don't understand why. I don't think you should be embarrassed to want to serve your country. I was very proud to serve my country in the armed forces, and I got to the highest rank I could so that I could have the best effect that I could, and I was very proud to serve as a diplomat around the world, and I served in the highest offices that I could because you want to have the best influence you can. And I hope people think I'm doing an okay job in politics, because I see this as part of the same thing. This is still part of the service that I think that we owe to our country, and we owe to our community, and we owe to the people of the United Kingdom. And of course, I want to have an influence that helps to shape the country for the best. I can look around the United Kingdom today, and I can look at infrastructure. I can look at hospitals. I can when I speak to people in my community about the difficulty they have in getting a GP's appointment or getting a dental appointment. When I talk to people in schools who are struggling with either places or the different pressures that head teachers deal with, and these are what I spend my days dealing with most of the time. Those are the things that you want to change, and you want to change it by working together with colleagues and having a voice at the highest level. Of course you do.
Well, that sounds like quite a strong ambition there. Look, there isn't a vacancy now, but let's be honest with each other. There might be one soon. We don't know how Sue Gray is going to go or what's going to happen with your party leadership. Would you run if there was a leadership contest soon?
I hope that if there is, as you rightly say, there isn't one, but I hope that many people will run. The whole point about an election, I think I'm making it pretty clear that I think that it's up to all of us to put ourselves forward, and it's up to the electorate, in the first case, parliamentary colleagues, in the second case, the party, to choose. So I think it's a position of absolute integrity to say that of course you should offer yourselves to the electorate if you think you can do it. Of course you should talk to colleagues and see if you can get a group together, and if you can get a group together, then you should go for it. Now I haven't been canvassing support, so I don't know if I'd be able to get the first group together. You've got to get a group first, but if you could, of course you should have a go. I mean, it's absolutely right. That doesn't mean that you should walk off in a huff if you don't get it. It means that you should offer what you've got, what you can do, and accept what people want you to do.
All right. Well, it certainly sounds like you're thinking quite carefully about it.
Well, I mean, I'm being as frank as I can with you at a time when there isn't an opening, Tom, which is.
Okay, watch this space. I think if the intro isn't "you're running," you're certainly thinking about it.
Well, there's nothing to run for at the moment, but it's certainly true to say that I hope many of my colleagues, look, there are some fantastic people on the front bench. People quite rightly talk about Rishi Sunak, they talk about Liz Truss, they talk about Nadine Zahawi, they talk about Sajid Javid, they talk about any number of people who are doing extraordinarily hard jobs well. And I think it's a fantastic credit to this party, the Conservative Party, that it is offered not just good government for the United Kingdom for many, many years, but it has also offered extraordinary access for many people from many different communities, from many different backgrounds, the chance to serve in many different ways. And I look at people. I just mentioned Nadeem, a guy who turned up as a kid, aged I think it was 8 or 9, not able to speak English. He's Education Secretary. You look at somebody like Rishi, who, family, I think he's a second-generation immigrant from India. He's Chancellor of the Exchequer. You look at Sajid Javid, who very famously, his dad was a bus driver.
I know your colleagues are wonderful. I get your sentiment here, but it's not us putting you in the frame. Ladbrokes, they've got you at 12-1. Other people are talking about you potentially, running from a certain wing of the party. I mean, it definitely sounds like you're thinking about it.
I'm not a gambler, but I'll just watch that.
Okay, final question. And look, if you do run, and clearly it's pretty high up in your thinking, you did vote to stay in the European Union. The referendum, you were unabashed about that. Do you think a Remainer could really lead the Conservative Party in this day and age?
I don't think that's a question anymore. I mean, there is absolutely no way that we're going back into the European Union for, a generation, whatever that is, 30, 40 years. I mean, not only would we not apply, they wouldn't accept. There's no way. And these sort of halfway houses that people speak about, they don't work. You're either at the table taking the decision, or you're out, right? And which is why I never voted for any of the compromises. Once we voted to leave in 2016, that was it, decision made, and I voted accordingly, because none of those compromises work. What you've got to do now is you've got to set a firm agenda. You've got to invest in Britain's foreign policy instruments. That's of course the Foreign Office, defence, and things like that. But you've also got to use this as a revolutionary moment to transform Britain. I mean, look at what we need to do. We've had 2 revolutions in the last 5 years that have been underappreciated, I'd argue. The first is Brexit, which demands a revolution, because we're no longer competing with 27, we're competing with 190. The second revolution is COVID, which has changed the way that the world works. It's changed the nature of globalization. We've realized that some of our supply chains don't work as well. And we've also changed the way that our economy works, commuting, working from home, the obvious bits, but actually so much of the rest of our economy is now being transformed. And we need to wake up and move with it, because this is a massive opportunity for the United Kingdom. We have some of the most innovative people in the world. We have the most extraordinary centres of excellence, whether universities or financial or technology or whatever it happens to be. We've got the most dynamic economy, and we've got a really, really vigorous startup culture that is significantly better than anywhere else in Europe. We are so well placed for a fantastic future, and we need to grab it. And so I think there are 2 revolutions that we need to capitalise on, and looking backwards doesn't help anyone.
Okay. Mr Tugendhat, it does rather sound like a manifesto for government, but perhaps we can have a further conversation about that later time.
Well, I mean, I think every MP should have a manifesto for how they wish to see the community and the country changed. I mean, I think that's the point of being in politics, isn't it? To come up with ideas and to look for better ways to run our country.
Nothing wrong with that. Tom Tugendhat, thank you so much for joining us on TNG this morning, and from Sarajevo.
Thanks very much.